right, so we're diving into The Demon of Unrest.
Okay.
This pretty massive book by Erik Larson
Yeah.
that I know you've been kind of curious about. Now, I know you're a busy person, and you've mentioned that you prefer books that are concise and to the point.
Right.
So we'll figure out together
Okay.
if this nearly 600-page deep dive
Yeah.
into the 5 months leading up to the Civil War
Yeah, okay.
is worth your precious time.
Excellent point. We want to
Okay.
be sure this book is the right fit for you.
Right.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut
Okay.
to understanding what Larson brings to the table,
Yeah.
especially compared to other Civil War books you may have read.
Exactly. And, I felt this unsettling sense,
Yeah.
like many people today,
Yeah.
of history repeating itself,
Oh, yeah.
especially when it comes to political divides.
Right.
And from what I gather, that's one of the things that drew Larson to this period in the first place.
Absolutely. He was already researching the book before the January 6th attack.
But that event definitely amplified his interest in exploring how seemingly small events can trigger massive upheaval.
Yeah.
And he chose a fascinating time period for this.
Okay.
Those 5 months between Lincoln's election
Right.
and the start of the Civil War.
Yeah.
A period often glossed over in other books.
Okay, so he's looking at the build-up to the explosion,
Yeah.
not the explosion itself.
Exactly.
But why focus on South Carolina specifically?
Yeah.
What made it the flashpoint?
That's the central question Larson tries to answer.
Okay.
He was intrigued by how a state he describes as
Okay.
primitive, scantily populated, and in economic decline
Wow.
could become the catalyst for America's bloodiest conflict.
That is a good question.
Right.
You'd think it would have been a more powerful state, or at least one with a stronger economic reason to fight.
Right. But Larson dives deep,
Okay.
relying heavily on primary sources like diaries, letters,
Hmm.
and even slave ledgers
Interesting.
to paint a vivid picture of those chaotic months.
For example, he uses Mary Chestnut's diary,
Okay.
not just to chronicle the Charleston social scene,
Right.
but to reveal the anxieties and rumors swirling among the elite.
Okay.
It's like eavesdropping on history in real time.
I can see how that would bring the story to life.
Yeah,
But honestly, that's also where my concern about the book's length kicks in.
I understand.
Does Larson sometimes get bogged down in those minute details?
Mhm.
The kind of stuff that makes you want to skim ahead.
I understand your hesitation. While some readers might find the extensive quotes
Right.
and detailed descriptions overwhelming,
Yeah.
they're precisely what make Larson's work so immersive.
Okay.
Think of it this way. He's not just telling you about Charleston. He's dropping you right into the city.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Okay.
But give me an example.
Well, picture this Charleston in 1860.
Right.
This picturesque southern city known for its elegance and charm.
Okay.
But Larson also points out that it was overrun with vultures,
Vultures.
and they were protected by law.
Because they were so good at cleaning up the streets. Imagine beautiful architecture,
Okay.
charming gardens, and vultures everywhere.
Wow, that's vivid.
Yeah.
I can see how that would create a memorable image.
Yes.
Not what you typically expect from a history book.
Exactly. And then he juxtaposed that image with descriptions of hidden slave markets operating just blocks away.
Wow.
You start to see the city through the eyes of its inhabitants.
Okay.
The beauty, the decay, the simmering tensions hidden beneath a veneer of civility.
That makes sense. So the details, while they could feel excessive,
Mhm.
actually serve a purpose.
Precisely. And those details are particularly important.
Okay.
When Larson zooms in on individuals,
Okay.
like Major Anderson, the commander at Fort Sumter,
All right.
he was this incredibly conflicted figure,
Okay.
a Southerner loyal to the Union,
Right.
facing an impossible dilemma
Yeah.
through Anderson's letters and reports.
Okay.
We feel the weight of his responsibility.
The agony of his decisions. It's history on a human scale.
Oh, that does sound compelling.
Yeah.
But I do have to ask, does focusing on these individual stories mean he misses the bigger picture?
That's a valid concern. Some critics have pointed out that Larson barely mentions events like Harper's Ferry,
Right.
which many historians consider a major trigger for the war.
Yeah.
However, I think Larson's choice is deliberate.
Okay.
He wants to show how personal decisions, even seemingly insignificant ones,
Right.
contributed to the larger conflict.
It's like he's saying that history isn't just made by presidents and generals,
Yeah,
but by everyday people caught in extraordinary circumstances.
exactly.
I like that it's much more relatable.
And it's through those individual stories that we can understand the complex motivations and
Right.
miscalculations that led to the war.
Hmm.
For example, Larson highlights the proposed Shadow Amendment.
The what?
The Shadow Amendment.
Yeah.
It was a last-ditch attempt to prevent war
Okay.
by guaranteeing the South's right to slavery. Imagine that a constitutional amendment protecting slavery
Okay.
almost passed both houses of Congress
Oh, wow.
just weeks before the war began.
I had never heard of that.
Right.
That's a huge detail to leave out of most Civil War narratives.
It is, and it shows just how close the nation came to a very different outcome.
Yeah.
Larson's use of these lesser-known events and personal accounts
Right.
really helps us grasp the chaotic atmosphere and
Yeah.
the high stakes of those pre-war months.
I could see how those details would make it feel like you're right there in the
Yeah.
middle of the action.
Yes.
But all this talk of vultures and hidden slave markets, traumatic personal stories, it almost sounds more like a novel than a history book.
Okay.
Does that make it less accurate or objective?
That's a great question. And it leads us into the next aspect of the book we should consider,
Okay.
Larson's unique writing style and how it shapes his historical interpretation.
Perfect. Let's unpack that in part 2.
You're right to point out that Larson's style leans toward narrative. Even though he's dealing with historical events,
Right.
it's almost like reading a fast-paced thriller,
Yeah.
but grounded in real events.
That makes sense, given what we've already discussed
Right.
about his use of details and personal stories.
Yeah.
But does this approach compromise this historical accuracy?
Okay.
Does he get carried away by the drama?
That's a common concern with narrative history.
Okay.
While Larson's work is rigorously researched, he does weave a compelling narrative.
Right.
His strength lies in bringing the past to life,
Okay.
making it relatable and emotionally engaging.
Okay.
He achieves this by focusing on the human drama, the clash of personalities,
Okay.
and the weight of decisions made during that turbulent period.
So you're saying that while he may not be writing a dry academic text,
Right.
he's still committed to historical accuracy.
Yes.
It's more about how he presents the information.
Exactly. He uses literary techniques to draw readers in,
Okay.
making them feel like they're experiencing the events alongside the historical figures. Take, for instance, his portrayal of Edmund Ruffin,
Okay.
the fiery secessionist.
Okay.
Larson uses Ruffin's own writings and speeches to show how his rhetoric played on the fears and anxieties of Southerners,
Right.
pushing them towards secession.
So it's not just Larson's interpretation.
Exactly.
He's actually using primary sources to show how these individuals thought and acted.
Precisely. And by immersing us in their world,
Okay.
we begin to understand how seemingly rational people could make choices
Yeah.
that led to such devastating consequences.
Right.
It's a subtle way of exploring the complexities of human nature and the dangers of unchecked ideology.
Okay. But that brings us back to the question of bias.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that Larson wrote this book with a modern lens,
Right.
influenced by events like the January 6th attack.
Mhm.
Does that perspective overshadow his historical analysis?
It's true that Larson acknowledges parallels
Okay.
between the pre-Civil War era and our current political climate, particularly the dangers of division and extremism.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that he even compared the attack on Fort Sumter
Yes.
to the January 6th attack, which felt a bit pointed.
Yes, and some critics argue that this comparison is too on the nose,
Okay.
potentially sacrificing historical nuance
Right.
for contemporary relevance.
Okay.
However, remember that every historian brings their own perspective to their work.
Right.
Larson's focus on the fragility of democracy
Okay.
and the dangers of political polarization
Mm-hmm.
are certainly informed by our current context,
Yeah.
but his research and analysis remain grounded in historical evidence.
So it's more about being aware of his perspective as a reader, understanding that it might influence his interpretation of certain events.
Exactly, just like understanding the context of those primary sources,
Yeah.
the diaries, letters, speeches,
Right.
helps us interpret them accurately.
Right.
It's about critical engagement
Okay.
with both the sources and the historian's lens.
That's a good point. And it makes me think about how this book compares to other Civil War books I've read,
Yeah.
like Robert E. Lee and Me.
Okay.
That book was very analytical, focused on debunking myths about the Confederacy and Lee himself.
Mhm.
It felt more like a direct lecture, whereas The Demon of Unrest,
Okay.
as you said, feels more like a story.
You've hit on a key difference.
Okay.
If Robert E. Lee and Me aims to deconstruct the mythology surrounding the Confederacy,
Right.
The Demon of Unrest seeks to immerse us in the lived experience of those hurtling towards war.
Okay.
It's less about grand narratives and strategic analysis,
Okay.
and more about the anxieties, rumors, and
Okay.
personal struggles that shaped individual choices and ultimately the course of history.
That's a really helpful distinction.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking for a book that challenges my assumptions about the Confederacy,
Right.
Robert E. Lee and Me is probably a better choice.
Mm.
But if I want a more visceral, emotionally resonant experience of the pre-war period, The Demon of Unrest might be the way to go.
Precisely think about what kind of reading experience you're looking for.
Okay.
Do you want to analyze arguments and deconstruct myths?
Right.
Or do you want to step back in time, feel the tension build, and understand the human drama behind historical events?
That's a great way to put it. And it makes me think about another point you made earlier
Okay.
about how Larson highlights the role of social and cultural factors
Right.
in the lead up to the war.
Yes, he goes beyond the usual political and military analysis
Okay.
to explore how cultural differences between the North and South
Okay.
contributed to the growing divide.
Okay.
Remember the example of chewing tobacco in Charleston?
Oh, yeah, the streets covered in brown stains.
Yes.
It's a small detail, but really paints a picture of a different world.
Exactly. And it highlights a cultural practice that would have seemed utterly foreign
Right.
to many Northerners.
Right.
It's through these seemingly mundane details that Larson reveals a deeper cultural chasm that existed long before the first shots were fired.
That's fascinating. It's like those small details act as cracks in the facade,
Yes.
hinting at the deeper tensions
Yeah.
simmering beneath the surface.
Precisely. And that's where Larson's strength lies.
Okay.
He uses those details, those cracks in the facade,
Okay.
to weave a narrative that is both historically informative and emotionally compelling.
Right.
It's a way of understanding history not just as a series of events,
Right.
but as a lived experience.
So it sounds like The Demon of Unrest offers a unique perspective on the Civil War,
Yes.
focusing on the human drama and those pivotal months leading up to the conflict.
Exactly.
But the question remains,
Right.
with its length and narrative style, is it the right book for you?
That's the question.
Let's move on to our final part and see if we can answer that question definitively. Okay, so we've explored Larson's approach,
Yeah.
his use of vivid details, the
Yeah.
way he brings those historical figures to life. We've also talked about his potential biases
Mm.
and how his writing style might not be for everyone.
Right.
But the big question remains,
Yeah.
is The Demon of Unrest worth your time?
That's the million-dollar question. And I think the answer,
Okay.
like with most things, is it depends.
Okay, fair enough, but depends on what exactly.
It depends on what you're looking for in a Civil War book.
Go.
If you're seeking a concise, purely objective account of battles and strategies,
Right.
this might not be the best choice.
Yeah.
There are plenty of excellent books that focus on the military and political aspects of the war.
Right, like Robert E. Lee and Me, which we
Right.
talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That one was much more analytical and focused on debunking myths.
Exactly. But The Demon of Unrest offers something different.
Okay.
It's an immersive experience, a deep dive into the chaotic atmosphere and the human drama of those pre-war months.
Okay.
It's about understanding the people, their motivations, their fears, and how those individual choices ultimately contributed to the outbreak of war.
So it's less about the war itself and more about the why and how it happened.
Yeah.
It's about those crucial turning points,
Yes.
the moments where things could have gone differently.
Precisely. And Larson doesn't shy away from highlighting those turning points.
Okay.
Remember the Shadow Amendment we discussed?
Oh, yeah.
That near-miss constitutional amendment?
Right.
That would have guaranteed the South's right to slavery?
Yeah.
It's a chilling reminder of how close the nation came to a completely different path.
It's a detail I'd never encountered before.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think about those what-if scenarios. What if that amendment had passed?
Exactly.
Would war have been averted or just postponed?
Those are questions Larson encourages us to ponder.
Okay.
He doesn't offer easy answers,
Right.
but he presents the evidence, the personalities, the atmosphere of the time,
Yeah.
and allows us to draw our own conclusions.
So it's not just about absorbing information. It's about engaging with history on a deeper level.
Wrestling with those complex questions.
Exactly. And that's where the book truly shines.
Okay.
It's a thought-provoking exploration of a pivotal moment in American history, one that continues to resonate with us today.
Okay, I'm convinced you've made a strong case for the Demon of Unrest.
Good.
But for a busy person like me, what's the most important takeaway? Why should I add this book to my already overflowing reading list?
Because it offers a fresh perspective on a familiar topic.
Okay.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles, but about people making choices, often with unintended and devastating consequences.
Right.
And perhaps most importantly,
Okay.
it's a reminder that the seeds of division and conflict can take root anywhere,
Yeah,
even in a seemingly stable and prosperous society.
that's a powerful message, especially given the current political climate.
It is.
It's a reminder to be vigilant, to understand the forces that can lead to division and conflict,
Yeah.
and to work towards dialogue and understanding. Absolutely. And while the Demon of Unrest focuses on a specific historical period,
Right.
it offers valuable insights that are relevant to our own time.
Okay.
It's a reminder that the choices we make individually and collectively can have a profound impact on the course of history.
Well said. So to wrap things up, would you recommend The Demon of Unrest
Okay,
to someone like me who's interested in history but also pressed for time?
I would say yes, especially if you enjoy immersive narratives
Okay.
and appreciate historical details that bring the past to life.
Okay.
If you're looking for a quick surface-level overview, there might be better options.
Right.
But if you're ready to spend some time with this book,
Okay.
to truly delve into the world of 1860 and experience the drama unfold,
Right.
then The Demon of Unrest is a rewarding read.
That's great advice. Thanks
Yeah.
for walking us through this deep dive.
You're welcome.
I feel like I have a much better grasp of what this book offers
Good.
and whether it's the right fit for me and for our listeners out there. If you're intrigued by this period in American history and you're looking for a book that will truly transport you back in time, consider adding The Demon of Unrest to your reading list.
I agree.
And as always, let us know what you think.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.